Hi, my name is Sasha. I'm sitting in the Albany Institute of History and Art, and I'm excited to be interviewing Amy Silberkleit today. When did you first know art was something you're passionate about, and what motivates you to continue?
I think I always was making things and drawing, and I just had a very strong feeling about what I looked at all the time. So it was just the way it was. There wasn't one time. And then I just continued. I felt strongly about things I saw. So it just made sense to me to try and express that in a visual way. I wasn't particularly interested in writing or other artistic forms of expression.
You were the artistic director at the Rod and Rose Puppet Theater, and you've also sold puppets and fabric collages and craft festivals. Are there any similar themes between your work in puppeteering and your lithographs? And does this passion for crafts carry into your work as an artist?
So when we were doing the puppetry, we were creating an illusion that inanimate objects were alive. The type of puppetry we did was based on plays, so it's very theatrical, and we were telling a story. But we weren't using humans, we were using puppets to stand in as live actors. So it was a trick, when we wanted the audience to think that the puppets were alive, which they obviously weren't, and the audience knew they weren't. So we had to think about how to create the illusion that these objects, the puppets, which were made out of paper mache and fabric, were the characters in the play, and that they were reacting to one another. So now that I'm focusing on drawing and printing, and I'm doing representational work, I'm trying to take a three-dimensional object, draw it, and make it look like it is three-dimensional, but it's actually on a two-dimensional piece of paper. So I'm creating the illusion that what you see on the paper is the object. So they're very similar in that way. I'm somehow trying to recreate something that you see as a three-dimensional object into a flat piece of paper, on the wall. But that object's not there anymore. So that is very similar. But also the thinking that goes on to do that is also very similar. So if you take something like the wasp nest and I want to make it look like it has form, I have to think about what process am I going to do to make it look like it goes back in space, So in that way, they're similar. As far as craft, I'm not making just drawings. I'm turning them into prints. And there's a lot that goes on after I draw on the stone. I have to make it printable. I have to run it through the press. And when we were doing the puppet shows, there was a lot of work that went on behind the scenes that the audience didn't see while they were watching the show. There's a similarity there between the process of making a lithograph as opposed to drawing directly on a piece of paper. The process of doing the whole production of a puppet show, it's not as direct. There's all these other skills that have to come into play that I would relate more to crafts, let's say, than if I was just drawing on a piece of paper. When you're done with the drawing, that's it. That's the thing you have created.
You're making a 3D object turn into a solid picture, and you're making your puppets seem more alive to the audience.
Yes, I think they both are involving illusion.
So I want to shift gears and talk specifically about 1918. I read in your description of 1918 in the Woodstock Artists Association and Museum website that this piece was inspired by the pandemic of this year and the devastation that it has caused, evident by the subject of your art wearing a mask. By creating a modern theme in this way, why did you choose to depict a drastically different era of an early 20th century woman and title this piece after that decade, rather than name it after this year and call it 2020?
Well, that's why I brought in the hats. I just happen to have a hat collection. When I was making puppets, I used fabrics to clothe the puppets that I had found at, garage sales or antique stores where they had older clothes. And then, because I felt those fabrics were really evocative, and in the process, I got a hat collection because often there were old hats that no one wanted. So prior to the pandemic, I was making the decision to render the hats because they're mostly like this, which is black and made out of all different materials, which to me seemed perfect for lithography, which is all about texture. Well, when you use lithography with stones, the texture of the stone is often a very important element in the print that you end up with. So the hats are a lot of different fabrics. This one in particular was my favorite. And I was normally doing landscapes, but all of a sudden, what was happening to all the other humans on the planet was very important. There was something about the humanity that really struck me, and I was much more interested in people when in the spring. And it seemed totally appropriate to start doing the hats at that very moment. And this one in particular is my favorite. And I can only say that there's something really unhat-like about it. Like, it's got these leaves on it, and they're moving across the crown like that. To me, it's just amazingly unusual. And those are leaves, I assume, but they're in all different shapes. Like, time has changed this hat a great deal. It's also falling apart. So it just struck me, this is the time to do this particular hat. I have modern hats, but the hat was a really important accessory. So, and they were expressive. It's similar to what I was trying to do with the puppets. I don't know who would wear this hat or who wore this hat. I don't think I've ever worn this hat out of the house, But I think about it, it definitely makes a statement. So that's why I chose this particular hat. And it's from that era. It's from around 1918. So this is when people wore hats like this. So it just seemed like the right thing to do. There's two different types of fabric that I knew I could render on the stone because of the way you use the lithography crayon. Then I put it on my head, and the rest of my face looked totally wrong with this hat. So I put on this old scarf from the same era, and this is what we were doing in the spring, is covering our faces.
Yeah.
The other thing is this hat was meant to be worn with a hairdo that holds the hat up. It's quite a large head here. So when I put it on, it went right over my eyes, It just seemed like, okay, here we go again, Now we're covering our faces, you can show more personality if you put a hat on your head too, once you're masking. There's really not a lot of seen except for your eyes and your hair, you know.
Yeah.
A hat is becoming an accessory even more so.
On a little bit of a different point, this artwork portrays a female who has everything hidden but an exposed eye. Women during the title year of your piece would not gain suffrage until 2 years old. Does this portrait of a woman have any symbolism that surrounds persecution?
I was thinking really about the hat and the time of the hat. I knew the significance of that time, but that wasn't what I was thinking about when I made the piece.
So now I'd like to talk about your other artwork, Shelter in Place, Paper Wasp Nest. I read that this piece also has a correlation to the COVID-19 pandemic. However, this image is less apparent in connecting to the virus than the familiar recognition of a mask. Can you explain the symbolism behind this portrayal of a wasp nest in relationship to the pandemic?
Well, it came down out of a tree in a storm, and which ripped it open, exposing the intersection. And the wasp made it to protect their young, you know, the eggs, the larvae, and all the stages until they were adult wasps. And then it's covered with this outer protective layer that they make. It just seemed like, whoa, all these people are in their houses, staying safe. This is really reminiscent of what's happening all around me. It is about this size. I no longer have it because it's not made to last, and it just sort of fell apart while I was drawing it, but I would have rendered it anyway, you know. To me, it was incredibly beautiful, but in the process of rendering and looking at it, I was like, this is really what's happening all around me. I mean, process I do takes many hours of just sitting and drawing. So I have an opportunity to actually think about things around me, and you know, while you're sitting there alone and rendering, you have to think about what's happening in the wider world. This was in the spring through the summer. I try when I'm rendering to attempt to put into the drawing how I feel about things. So I can't say that I found it and then said, this is exactly what's happening around me, but in the process of drawing it, it really was. It's like, this is what's happening in the small world, what wasps do, but it's also in the wider world. When you focus on drawing like that, everything that's happening around you doesn't stop, but it has an influence, and so it's important that it's there on a piece of paper, and that's what makes each artist, you know, unique, let's say. They either do, or they either consciously want to project how they feel about things, or they don't. It's, you know, a stylistic choice, let's say. But I'm definitely affected by the medium. It's a lot less immediate, you know. Or if someone goes out into the woods and draws right where they are and they're trying to get the light at that moment, that's a little different than trying to get an object, you know, really delve deeply into an object and how it sits in space and then put it down onto a piece of paper.
It's definitely very impressive, your process, how you gain the inspiration and then you have the materials and the skill to portray portray it the way that you intended. That's really incredible. Well, that concludes my questions. Thank you so much for taking your time to sit down and talk with me today.
You're welcome. It was a pleasure.